Hi Year 4. Today we're going to be discussing hierarchy in Anglo-Saxon society. So hierarchy is a way to structure an organisation or a nation or a society using different levels of authority and a chain of command between superior, the upper bits, and the inferior, the lower bits, levels of the organisation. Higher levels control the lower levels of the hierarchy. We've learned over the course of 150 years that the Saxons created 7 different kingdoms. But how were those kingdoms ruled? What would it have been like to live there? We've learned that within the kingdoms there would have been a series of villages. People lived in wooden houses with a high fence around them to keep animals in and enemies out. With the Saxons being in all different kingdoms, they were constantly fighting with each other to try and claim more land in England. So each kingdom was ruled by a king or a warlord. These were known as the Sinning, as this was a Saxon word for king. The king was at the top of the society and everyone had to follow his orders, as you can see by the little triangle down the bottom there. Unlike most monarchies, Saxon kings would only be a king for as long as they could fight to keep their place, just as being the son of a king did not guarantee to be the next king, as with most monarchies today. Below the king were thanes. Thanes lived in large halls, owned land and helped the kings rule their kingdom. Each thane was in charge of a village or small areas. In later Saxon years, earls would be introduced as higher than a thane but lower than a king. The earls would rule over earldoms or like counties, groups of villages. Most people in Anglo-Saxon society were churls. These were common people or peasants. They lived in one-room huts and worked on the land and had a trade, like weaving or metalwork. Churls had to obey the order of the thane and fight for them in battle. There were different kinds of churls as well. Some of them were really rich and owned their own land, whereas some of them were poor and had to work on other people's land. Some of them, the richer ones, could even become thanes if they had enough money to buy a larger hall and run their own village. So all these people were considered to be a part of the Anglo-Saxon society, with the king at the top, the thanes underneath them, and the churls at the bottom. However, there were 2 groups of people not considered to be an important part of the society, so weren't even part of the hierarchy at all. Right at the bottom you had slaves. They were often treated badly and were forced to work for the thane for their whole life. Slaves were often people who were captured after battles and forced into slavery. Some were also people who couldn't afford to pay for land or fines, so would sell themselves into slavery to pay for the debt instead. Sometimes, after a while, if they had worked off the value of their debt, they would then be free and become churls again. They had no home, so slept in barns or cowsheds. Saxon society was patriarchal, which means it was male-dominated, so women were not even given a social class. They were not permitted to eat in the feast hall, but a rich man's wife might serve food. Women stayed home looking after children, making clothes, and cooking. So as you can see here, here's the diagram of showing that in the Saxon hierarchy you have the king at the top, thanes below them, and then churls at the bottom below them. And then slaves and women not even a part of the Saxon society as proper people, unfortunately, unlike it is today.